From the National Catholic Register, this is Register Radio, bringing light and clarity to the news and topics that affect your life.
Pilgrims are crossing the United States on 4 different routes, coming from the north, south, east, and west. These National Eucharistic Pilgrimages collectively cover more than 6,000 miles. The Marian Route traverses the Midwest, and today, Register Senior Editor Jonathan Liedl, who hails from Minnesota, will give us insights into the Midwestern Catholicism. Then we'll get a broader glimpse of the state of Catholicism in America, as told through the new book, True Confessions, Voices of Faith from a Life in the Church. The book's author, Fran Maier, discusses his fascinating collection of interviews with bishops, priests, and lay leaders. I'm Jeanette DeMello, Executive Director of the National Catholic Register and Catholic News Agency, your host here on Register Radio. I'm joined by my co-host, Matthew Bunson. Matthew sat down with Jonathan Liedl in the Guadalupe Radio Network studio in EWTN News' Washington Bureau.
Midwest Catholicism is humble yet powerful, just like Mary. That's the title of Jonathan Liedl's feature story at the ncregister.com about the National Eucharistic Pilgrimage's Marian Route. Jonathan, welcome to Register Radio again. This is a very different type of a story that you undertook. I know it's part of a mammoth program that we're exploring and joyously covering here in the U.S. of the Eucharistic Revival. You're one of those guides for our readers and now our listeners to these Marian pilgrimage routes, but one in particular, the pilgrimages that are going to kick off on Pentecost Sunday, the Marian Route is the northernmost route. Talk about it.
Yeah, so this is the route that starts in the Midwest. It's the only route to originate in the Midwest, even though they're all ending in Indianapolis. This one starts or has started on May 17th in northern Minnesota at the headwaters of the Mississippi, and goes through Minnesota, Wisconsin, Illinois, and Indiana. So, it's called the Marian Route. Each of these routes, right, is named for a different saint. So we have the Juan Diego route from the south. We have the Eudipero route coming from the west, and we have the Elizabeth Ann Seton route coming from the east. This one's called the Marian Route, right? Mm-hmm. And so why is that? Well, there are a couple big Marian stops along the way. Our Lady of Champion in Wisconsin, the church-approved Marian apparition, and also the University of Notre Dame, which of course is named after Our Lady, places like that. But in the article, my contention is that the Midwest is the most properly Marian region of the United States. So that's what I think is unique about this route, and it really kind of puts that humble, lowly Midwest Catholicism on display that, like Mary, might have been humble, might have been lowly, but has really allowed God to do some amazing, powerful things through it.
Well, in your story, you reference that humility, and the phrase, of course, it's often used very unfairly. I've lived in the Midwest, is that this is flyover country or flyover land.
Yes.
What is it about the Midwest that you find so especially significant, especially as a route for a pilgrimage leading to this Eucharistic Revival's gathering in Indy?
Yeah, so I mean, flyover country, like that's the kind of stereotype. You meet people on the coast, or when you meet people in Europe who are traveling to the U.S., they tell you, I'm going to New York, and then I'm going to Florida, and then I'm going to Los Angeles, and, there's nothing else to see, right? They're kind of skipping over this whole part of the country that I kind of call the U.S.'s sort of neglected middle child, right? But I think, I'm from the Midwest. I've spent most of my life basically in Wisconsin, Minnesota, Indiana. And I think the Midwest, it punches above its weight in terms of its impact and contribution to the church in the U.S. And you can see this at so many of the stops along the route. So whether we're talking about the Archdiocese of St. Paul and Minneapolis in Minnesota, which has given rise to national ministries like St. Paul's Outreach, Net Ministries, the first Catholic Studies academic program in the country at the University of St. Thomas, whether, we talk about Notre Dame, which of course is a contested place in terms of its Catholic identity and its fidelity to it. But I mean, the story is incredible, right? This is 1842, some Holy Cross French priests establishing this little itty-bitty Catholic university in Frontier, Indiana, that nowadays, despite the difficulties Notre Dame has, is really, I think, home to so many wonderful leading Catholic institutes, thinkers, and leaders, and still in sleepy South Bend. And then I love to make this point, right? The only church-approved Marian apparition is in Champion, Wisconsin, right?
Well, for the U.S.
Yes. Oh, sorry. Excuse me. Very clear. Yeah. In the U.S., right, the only church-approved apparition in the United States is just outside of Green Bay, Wisconsin. So, the people there received this Marian apparition in the 1850s, and it was kind of, an indication that they could receive more gifts from God. So then 60 years later, the Green Bay Packers came along. Right. But I think, it's a place where you're known for, I think, its humility, it's hard work. It's not as flashy as maybe the East Coast, not as cool as the West Coast, but it's people that are very humble, very simple, very faithful. Cardinal Dolan has spoken about when he was the rector of the North American College in Rome. He said the seminarians coming from the Midwest, right, have this kind of dedication and hardworkingness and fastidiousness to him that have really gone on to bless the church in so many different parts of the world.
And he would know, too, aside from that, because he was Archbishop in Milwaukee for a few years before he was sent to New York.
And a native of St. Louis, too.
And a native of St. Louis, yeah.
Missouri. So, and we think of, it's spiritually, but also, I think culturally, the Midwest, it's the heartland of America. It's the place where so much of our agriculture comes from. And these rural communities, both in American culture and also I think in the U.S. Church, continue to be sort of like reservoirs, right? That when the cities get too crazy, these are places that kind of, draw us back to humanity and the natural order. So it's a place that I think is special, overlooked sometimes, but because of that, God's been able to do some special things in the Midwest.
All right, you mentioned the Green Bay Packers. Of course, we have the great Catholic head coach there, Vince Lombardi. But so we've established the bona fides of the Midwest. What are the various stops then on this beautiful route?
Absolutely. So it kicks off at the headwaters of the Mississippi River, Itasca State Park in Bemidji, Minnesota, near Bemidji, Minnesota, up in the northern part of the state, which, again, just to emphasize the Marian connection, the Mississippi River was actually named by Father Jacques Marquette, a French missionary. He named it the River of the Immaculate Conception. So a kind of fitting image, right? Begins small, begins humble, begins pure, and then flows forth and is impactful. So the Mississippi River, just like Mary. So from the Diocese of Crookston, it will go to the Diocese of Duluth, Minnesota. So some beautiful views of Lake Superior from there before going through the Diocese of St. Cloud. And then in the Archdiocese of St. Paul in Minneapolis, one thing to flag is on May 27th. They're calling it the Source and Summit Procession. So for those of you who don't know St. Paul, Minnesota, Summit Avenue is home to the longest stretch of Victorian-era mansions in the United States. So going from the St. Paul Seminary along the Mississippi River up Summit Avenue to the Cathedral and National Shrine of St. Paul overlooking the whole city, the capital of Minnesota. And then we'll go down to Winona, Rochester, which is the home of Bishop Barron nowadays, and also the Mayo Clinic, a world-famous medical center. So I'm sure a number of Catholic doctors will be participating. Crossing from there into La Crosse, Wisconsin, visiting the Our Lady of Guadalupe Shrine, cutting across Wisconsin to Green Bay, down through Milwaukee, and then we hit the Archdiocese of Chicago, which has a whole bunch of activities planned, celebrations, Eucharistic celebrations with various migrant communities, before making its way into Indiana, Notre Dame, through the Diocese of Fort Wayne, South Bend, Lafayette, and then coming to Indianapolis. So it's the shortest route, actually, of the four routes, because from Minnesota to Indianapolis isn't, as long as it is from California to Indianapolis, yes. But it's jam-packed, right? I just think there are so many beautiful stops along the way, such beautiful contrast between the natural beauty of this part of the country, so the Northwoods, the Great Lakes, the rivers, but then also, iconic cities, right, like the skyline of Chicago. And then so many beautiful Catholic communities along the way.
I'm guessing a lot of bridges, too.
Bridges, yeah. I know they'll be crossing the Mississippi probably a number of times because it really kind of winds its way down Minnesota, and then when they're crossing into Wisconsin as well. I think a beautiful opportunity. This is all of these routes. I'm obviously partial to the Midwest, but I think all of these routes what's so beautiful about them is that they are a chance to really be grateful to God and celebrate the Catholicity of the United States.
You've talked to a lot of the organizers, a lot of the pilgrims who are going on these processions. What are they telling you about their hopes, both for themselves but also for the revival?
Yeah, individual, the intentions that different people have on these routes are as different as their own lives and how God is working in their lives. So some perpetual pilgrims are talking about, I'm discerning my vocation, right? And I think 2 months on the road, walking with Jesus is a beautiful time to ask him what he wants from me and to listen to that.
Yeah, and what do you see as the potential impact of these processions on secular culture?
Well, that's a fascinating question because there are going to be some iconic moments, right? I mean, think about, the route in the West starts with a procession across the Golden Gate Bridge. The Eucharistic processions, the routes will pass through places like, the Big Apple, Manhattan, right? So at the very least, it can, force people to stop and wonder what's going on here. Why would people do something like this? Why would they take time out of their day or even sort of subject themselves, if you will, to this kind of scrutiny, be publicly walking in a religious procession, which to merely mortal eyes appears to be bread, right? And so hopefully it can be that source of inspiration. And of course, sometimes when these kinds of things happen, actually I was driving on the interstate recently, and there was a billboard that said something about call this number to learn more about God. And, maybe for 9 out of 10 people, that billboard is kind of annoying or something like that. But for one person, right, they might call and they might, learn more about God and learn more about his love for them, his plan for them. So in a similar way, we will never be successful witnesses if we ahead of time try to over-calculate and be like, oh, am I sure that this will, work, or will people, be uncomfortable with it? We just have to receive from God and trust in him and allow our love for him to guide us and to make this beautiful public witness of our Eucharistic Lord.
All right. We'll leave it there. Jonathan Liedl, I look forward to your additional reporting and your continuing love of the Midwest.
Beautiful. Thank you, Matthew.
When we come back, we'll hear from Fran Maier on his new book, True Confessions. This is Register Radio on EWTN. Stay tuned for more.
Let's return to Register Radio on EWTN.
Welcome back. I'm Jeanette DeMello, Executive Director of the National Catholic Register and Catholic News Agency, and your host here on Register Radio. I'm joined by my co-host, Matthew Bunson, who is EWTN News' Vice President and Editorial Director. The book, True Confessions, Voices of Faith from a Life in the Church, is written by Francis X. Maier, a true mentor of mine, who hired me many years ago to work in the Archdiocese of Denver alongside him and Archbishop Charles Chaput. Fran, your book made me nostalgic for those dynamic years in Denver in the early 2000s. We saw challenges in those years, but we also saw tremendous energy in lay apostolates like Focus and the Augustine Institute and Endow. They were different times than today, and in these 130 interviews you recount in your book, it really marks that difference well. Fran, what are the biggest challenges we are seeing in the church now?
I think people are prone to a little bit of despair when they run into problems, and I think also there's a tendency to try inappropriately to balance their commitment to the culture around them and their faith, when in fact sometimes those things are going in absolutely opposite directions, and that really is a problem because nobody likes conflict. They want to try to avoid it. We all do,
right,
at whatever cost, but that's not a very good strategy when you're in an environment like the one we're in today.
Yeah, that's right. What you're talking about is really a simulation, right? A simulation is something, I think Archbishop Charles Chaput, who you worked for so many years, 23 years, he has spoken a lot about that, and I've heard you speak about this, a simulation. And really, so many people in the book mention that as well in one way or the other. What do we actually mean by that? It's really adapting too much, right?
Yeah, well, I think Catholics need to remember that for a very long time in this country, Catholics were not welcome at all. I mean, this country is kind of a mixed marriage of Protestant biblical theology and Enlightenment rationalism, and there's not a lot of room in either of those strains of thought for loving the Catholic Church. So Catholics always, right from the get-go, had trouble being accepted here, and worked very hard to assimilate, to prove that they were good Americans, to excel so that they could get into leadership positions and prove that they were fully committed to the American project. And look, we've done extraordinarily well at that. And I've said many times that in a way we've succeeded too well, because in the process, culture has really bleached out our Catholic identity rather than our Catholic identity enriching American culture. So assimilation has logical roots, but the way that it's come to fruition in the early part of the 21st century is really not very healthy.
Yeah, I don't want to say that you're old, but you've got more than 40 years of experience in the church, 26 years in diocesan life, and 15 years as editor-in-chief of the National Catholic Register. Now you're senior fellow of Catholic Studies at the Ethics and Public Policy Center. That gives you access to a lot of Catholics. How did you choose your interviewees? What were some of the criteria that you gave yourself?
Yeah, well, Matt, that's a good question. I could have very easily taken that group that I interviewed and tripled it because of the number of people that I've met and admired over the years. The basic parameters were I didn't want people who had a reputation for being excessive either on the ecclesial left or right. I was very focused on people who were just faithful Catholics, more or less in the mainstream of American Catholic life. In terms of the bishops, I was very committed to getting bishops in different environments, urban and rural, and a mix of the two in as many states as I could. And so I ended up with 30 bishops in one foreign country and 25 states from the east to the west coast. So the mix of the bishops certainly is geographically and culturally representative. In terms of the other folks, I wanted to focus on key persons that I knew and did well in the priesthood, permanent diaconate, religious consecrated life, and then among the lay people who really make up the bulk of the book. I wanted to focus on people who had successful marriages, had children, but then were also predominantly educators, because educators form the next generation in a professional way. In addition to being mothers and fathers, they tend to be educators. And then, as a special thing, Matt, we have a son, as Jeanette knows, with Down syndrome. So I really wanted to spend some time talking to people who were dealing with special needs in their kids. And that chapter, personally, for me, is the most moving. There's an interview with Matt Hennessy from the Wall Street Journal, his wife Ursula, that it's just I think it's the best interview in the book. Mm-hmm. It's just really a very deeply moving interview, because they deal with a beautiful young woman, their daughter Magdalena, who has really severe challenges, and they do it with a lot of heroism and goodwill, which are very striking.
Yes, and they're so honest, and really that's something we hear in so many of these interviews, is this level of honesty and directness. And of course some of that comes from you and the type of questions you asked, and making them very comfortable in having the conversations you had. But really the honesty that the interviewees have is a gift for us. I think just an insight, a deep insight into how Catholics are grappling with this moment. We're talking to Fran Maier. Go ahead, Fran. Mm-hmm.
No, I think that's a really good observation, Jeanette, because you can't fix a problem unless you name it accurately. And so it would be easy to mistake some of the criticisms or expressions of concern that the people who are interviewed offer as negative, but that's not their motivation at all. I mean, you know as well as I do, doing the work that you do, people don't spend a lot of time complaining and sticking around if they don't love what they're talking about. And so the people who I interview were people who are very conscious, have a very honest sense of things that might be wrong in the church, but that's not their fundamental motivation or perspective. They're very, very committed to the church and very hopeful about the future.
Absolutely. We're talking to Fran Maier about his book, True Confessions. And Fran, you know, in this book, we're having this conversation right now, right around Mother's Day. And as I read your book, I was just struck by how you always refer, or the people you speak to, always refer to our church as she. And that is just, it's so important. Why is that so important?
Yeah. Oh, I'm so glad you asked that question. First of all, it's good Catholic theology. It's good Catholic theology because the church is the bride of Christ, literally. I mean, that's the way that we think about her and talk about her. But there's a tendency to deal with religious life as bureaucratic, and it has to do with the American way of social organization. Mm-hmm. The trouble is you can't love Ford Motor Company, and if you begin thinking about the Catholic Church as religion incorporated, pretty soon you begin seeing her much more as a problem than as a mother and a teacher, which is, as Archbishop Chaput always talked, borrowing from John the 23rd. That's how we need to think of her. She's our mother and our teacher. And she has a personal dimension as well as an institutional one. And the personal one is much more important than the institutional one.
So the question now for us is that of leadership. And what are you seeing there? What do we need today?
I think our bishops have been largely selected on the premise that we do fit here, that we live in a basically friendly environment to biblical religion. And so the bishops that have been selected are people who tend to be, good administrators, but in a sense also good political figures. I don't mean that in a secular sense, but people who know how to deal with the government and with different points of view and get along in society. I don't think that's sustainable anymore because the culture is turning and becoming more hostile to biblical religion and to the Catholic Church in particular. So in the future, we're going to need people who have a lot of prudence, but also the courage to speak up in the same manner that Archbishop Chaput did. You can't be afraid of criticism in this environment because you're going to get criticized, and we were told that by Jesus himself. Prudence is important, courage is very important, and an ability to endure criticism. Those are the things that are going to be needed in the future.
Right. And Fran, really, I mean, to Matthew's question about leadership, there's so many. You spoke to mostly leaders, right? Priests, bishops, big donors, heads of lay, apostolates, and the professors and family people you spoke to, too. I mean, all of us are called to be leaders right now. That's kind of where we are in the church. And I loved, I think it was the Reformation scholar Carl Trueman who spoke of the Cologne Cathedral. Give us that example.
That's a great example, and it has to do with with the medieval perspective on the salvation story. I mean, I think Carl mentions that the Cologne Cathedral took something like 400 or 500 years to build, and he makes the point that the stonemason who laid the first stone knew that he would never attend Mass in the cathedral that he was building. He knew that. But he believed in the future, and he built for the future. And I think Carl was saying, and I would certainly agree with this, that we need to. There's no quick fix for the problems that we're facing. There never have been quick fixes in the life of the church. We have to build for the future. We have to take very seriously the responsibility to passing on to our children and grandchildren the core of Catholic belief. And once you get into that mental state of this is going to take time in the same sense that growing, growing a harvest takes time, it becomes a lot easier to endure the daily irritations that you run into.
Right.
Your life is focused on the future.
Right, and that's the hope, right? The hope that shines in all of this is that everyone, I mean, people, throughout your book, people talked about this creative, motivated minority in the church. Those were an exact quote from, I think, a husband and author. And and that's what you see a lot in this, Fran, and I think that's a gift to the church. I also know you very well, and I know you have a sword hanging on your wall and a rosary always in your pocket. And I think those two things are important too. I mean, we have to be sharp in how we live, and we also have to be prayerful. And that certainly shines in your book, Fran. I'm so grateful for it. The book is True Confessions, Voices of Faith from a Life in the Church. It was reviewed at ncregistered.com by Mike Aquilina, and the article is titled True Confessions Offer Interpretive Key to the Church in Our Time. And you'll find information there on how to purchase the book from EWTN's Religious Catalog. So remember, there's also a lot more news and commentary at the National Catholic Register. So go to ncregistered.com. And as always, thanks for joining us here on Register Radio on EWTN. Together with Matthew Bunson and today's producer, Mike McCall, I'm Jeanette DeMello. Until next week, may God bless you.